Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized Truth Survives. I'm Heidi Sigmund Kuda. I'm here with Jim Stewartson and High Fidelity. We are an investigative show about disinformation, and we are on episode 67. We took a kind of endless summer of breakers. There was so much breaking news, but we're back to our full episodes. We are going to be bringing you news from Ukraine today with our good friend Sian Norris. She's an investigative reporter and feminist author. And she will be bringing you news from Kharkiv, where she spent the day getting shelled. And it's an important story about humanity and how we have to be listening to the people of Ukraine and not getting disinformation on Instagram or wherever you get your disinformation. So really stoked about that. Gentlemen, before we jump into Front Loaded, how are each of you?
You know, the usual, just marveling at the sort of fecklessness of our institutions as we slide towards whatever we're sliding towards. But we're going to keep slugging away.
Yeah, you said something interesting today, which I see as being a theme throughout the whole fall into 2024, that what we are facing is a global regression. And when you said that, I was like, yeah, because I had a friend who lived in Saudi Arabia in 1970. It was a much more open Saudi Arabia than it is now. And it's like, so when you pointed that out, Jim, I was like, you know what? This is absolutely what is happening. It's not just one country, isolated leaders. It's literally a global freedom regression.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Wow, those were your words, bro. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into Front Loaded.
Front Loaded.
All right, so I want to start with Anton Gerashenko. Our friends on Twitter will know him as a very important voice from Ukraine. He is a minister to the internal affairs of Ukraine. He tweeted out a Russian banner that says, "Children, kitchen, church, the sense and greatness of a Russian woman." Anyone paying attention knows that's the motto that Hitler declared in almost 100 years ago in the 30s. In his speech before the Women's National Socialist Organization. So Hitler at that point said, the world of the German woman is her husband, her family, her children, and her home. He used the words Kinder, Kirche, and Kirche, children, kitchen, church. But what's really important to know is that none of this is new. This is playing off a fascist playbook. And I wanted to open with that very important point because I just revisited Ruth Ben-Ghiat's Strong Men after having first read it about 3 years ago. And she nailed it, man. She is so prescient. The people that we are exposing on our show are working off of a playbook that started 100 years ago. Some of it can arguably date back to, various empires, but this losing sleep and plagued by an ulcer is a quote from her book about Mussolini, who had basically 2 of his goons had killed his major critic, and the people in Italy had turned against him. So he just, losing sleep and plagued by an ulcer, declared the world's first fascist dictator. But I encourage everybody to revisit Ruth's Strongmen book because you're going to find it all there. And you'll be a much, much better fighter in this particular war. But Jim, who's been doing comparisons between Hitler's speeches and some of Trump's words and Mike Flynn's rhetoric, will completely understand why this banner is so important.
I mean, Putin is, and I'll talk about this more in Hellscape. He is trying to take Russia back to traditionalist roots, right? This traditionalist fraud is just a way for dictators and authoritarians and fascists to control people. I mean, it's been this way, for a long time, and Putin is nothing short of a neo-Nazi. I mean, and again, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I look forward to talking about that more because the people that Putin is backing are the people that are trying to regress us quickly back to the dark ages. So the next story I want to bring up is I was suspended from Twitter last week, and it was for allegedly for a tweet I said in response to a Mad Owl blog about perhaps we can shoot Musk into space. But what I really think it's related to is a story that I had done on the cult of the genius tech bro. In that story, thanks to the advice of counsel here, Jim and Hi-Fi and other allies of ours, I really show that all this hype about these guys, the Zuckerberg, Thiel, Musk, uh, it was all manufactured. And these are not people who actually created things. They took other people's creations, and essentially they're trolls who are harming our world. And I think it's very important not to ever forget that these platforms were funded by Russian money. And it's also very important to never forget that, as Jackie talks about, there's this myth of meritocracy. There are these myths that somehow magically we'll wake up one day and this post-privacy world, which, by the way, Silicon Valley never apologized for, we're going to wake up one day and magically they'll be able to all regulate themselves. No, not at all. As Jim has said many times before, we now use these communication platforms like we need clean water and clean air, and we actually have to start thinking about how we're going to turn them somehow into public utilities. And when we say that, we get heavily trolled by the controlled opposition, but it's an important conversation to have. So I think that was probably related to my permanent banning, which was relieved the next day. Jim?
I mean, this is psychopathy being rewarded, right? Like, it's not about how intelligent Elon Musk is. It's about how willing has he been to cheat, to do deals with nefarious governments and nefarious individuals. What has he been willing to do along the way? Who has he been willing to destroy in the process of collecting $250 billion? And you see what happens when a feckless government and a feckless media enables him for 20 years to build an empire strictly devoted to infiltrating and ultimately, subverting the government that enabled him to get the money he has in the first place. So I think ultimately we're not, we're not talking about ideologies. We're not talking about business. We're not talking about business acumen or intelligence. We are talking about a system that rewards the worst and most willing to commit inhumane acts. We're looking at a system that rewards those people the most, and I think that's going to be the cause of a lot of strife. Let's put it that way.
Thank you. Hi-Fi?
Can we just talk about the fact that, in the same 10-day period, we in the United States find out that Elon Musk has crippled the Ukrainian military in offensive actions against their aggressors, Russia, who are committing war crimes, which we'll discuss with Sean later. Elon Musk turned off Starlink on the Ukrainians and, then showed up in Congress to talk about artificial intelligence. Like, why was he invited? We know that Saudi Arabia, recently we had the anniversary of 9/11. We know Saudi Arabia helped him buy Twitter and is now using data from Twitter to execute its own citizens who voice dissent against the Saudi Arabian government to their 8 followers.
Well, let me just. I mean, Saudi Arabia was infiltrated Twitter well before Elon Musk.
Yeah.
So those dissidents were targeted under Jack Dorsey's regime, just to be clear, and it's continued. Obviously, they liked the result they got, but they wanted more of it, right? So that's why we are where we are. But the Saudis have been undergoing this project for a long time.
I would also like to point out that the social media site Parler, prior to January 6th, 250,000 Saudi Arabian accounts were created on that platform. When we talk about psychological operations, that may be an indicator of such things happening, right? There is so much evidence against Elon Musk's poor behavior, going all the way back to his working with Dana Rohrabacher, Putin's favorite congressman. When does our government stand up and say, okay, that's enough? Like, we have a national security threat.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is, if I'm not mistaken, Elon Musk is a fucking problem. Is that what you're saying?
Indeed.
I knew that was coming. I knew that was coming. Before we move on, I want to quote my colleague Joshua C. Fidel here. They gathered our data, they processed it, and they turned it around and used it against us to drive some of us mad, some of us into radicalized extremists willing to kill for a political figure. Thank you so much for your help with this report, Hi-Fi. And I also just want to let people know they can find it at Byline Supplement, unpaywalled. And I think it's pretty freaking important. And speaking of unpaywalled, I just want to draw everybody to American Monsters. It's a series that I'm doing that's kind of trying to tie together all the links between the people who are basically working for Putin to destroy our democracy. And number 7 is Rudy Giuliani. And he's an important figure in all of this. And it's unpaywalled for a few weeks. If you appreciate it, please share it. But in the series so far, Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, Roy Cohn, Donald Trump, Steve Bannon, Mike Flynn, and now Rudy Giuliani. The way I'm doing it is very intentional, but it's just very important to see this is part of a very long game. It's very important to note that somebody like Giuliani, who people think, oh, what happened to this hero? He was really never a hero. That was actually false advertising. And if you look at the litany of things he's done, including his meddling and working in Ukraine on the disinformation plot, it all becomes pretty clear that this is all part of the same information warfare narrative that we have been exposing on our show for the few years that we've been producing it. So that's it for Front Loaded, unless you guys have anything else to say.
No, I'm good.
All right, let's move on to why it matters, Hi-Fi.
Why does it matter? Why does it matter? By High Fidelity.
First story this week, the advertisers own you. And no, I'm not talking about marketing manipulating you. I'm talking about marketing literally hacking your devices, and there is no defense for it. That's right. Israeli cyber firms have developed a new cyber attack spyware tool in which they slide malicious code in through advertisements that appear on your devices. Obviously, I would highly suggest everyone in our listening audience to employ ad blockers and maybe do some hard resets on your devices every day, because that is really, really bad. And the fact that there's no fix for it yet that's going to cause some serious market disturbance in the digital advertising marketplace.
And let's not forget that NSO, which is Israeli cybersecurity company, that Mike Flynn was on the board of its parent company, or was a consultant, sorry, to OSY, which was its parent company, to the tune of $200,000 before the 2016 election, where it has been widely alleged that Pegasus and NSO software has been used, and it has been proven that it was used against Khashoggi when MBS slaughtered him in Turkey.
And I do need to say that there's quite a history of Israeli intelligence and cybersecurity companies doing this kind of thing. Ronan Farrow wrote about it in the Black Cube Chronicles. This is something needs to be done. We need some sort of treaties. We need some sort of assurances from our allies that the products they develop are not being used by authoritarian governments to violate human rights.
Yeah, the problem is when it's their own authoritarian government doing it, right?
That's the problem, isn't it?
Sadly, we've got Netanyahu in power again, which is incredible. It's basically Donald Trump getting back in the White House, right?
Yeah.
He's been proven that he's a criminal on a number of levels.
Right.
He managed to get back in there, and what's he trying to do? He's trying to destroy their judicial system. He's trying to make it impossible for the judicial system to work, which is exactly what they're doing.
And I got a quick quiz for our audience. Who was the first person that Netanyahu called when he was ousted a couple years ago, vowing that he would make a comeback?
Putin.
Yes, Putin. So, newsbreaker, the Russia shit is real. So that'll be another theme moving into fall in 2024.
I do want to say, happy Rosh Hashanah to our Jewish viewers.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also like to give a shout out to the people of Israel, because since Netanyahu has pulled this crap,
mm-hmm.
Hundreds of thousands of Israelis are out in the streets demanding an end to it. So good on them.
And again, back to Ruth Strongman, we do know that resistance in that type of forum and format is always what has ultimately won or turned the course of events away from fascism and authoritarianism. So that's very nice. And also, a friend of mine just made me some challah bread, so I'm very excited about that. That's what I'm going to be diving into when we're done here.
Carbs. Nice. All right, moving on. Next story this week is AstroTurf to destroy the Earth. And this story comes from my home state of Ohio, in which at least 150 different people have found their names on a list that supported fracking in Ohio's state parks. However, at no point in time did they actually say, yeah, I did that. As a matter of fact, all of them have said, no, I never signed up for that. As a matter of fact, quite a few have said, I oppose fracking in our state parks. So the question then becomes, how did these names appear on this list of letters to the Ohio government supporting fracking? Of course, I doubt we'll get very many good answers, because the Ohio Attorney General, David Yost, who is investigating, he's been implicated in the First Energy bribery scandal, which is Ohio's largest bribery scandal. AG Yost had some choice words for a 10-year-old victim of rape who had to travel out of state for an abortion and never apologized for that. The problem with Ohio is the corruption.
Well, so there's hacking and fracking. That's quite interesting. But as we learned from you and David Pepper, Ohio is the heart of it all.
And while we're on the subject of corrupt AGs, today it was announced that Ken fucking Paxton, the dirtiest, most corrupt criminal, like sociopath in politics. I mean, which is saying something, was acquitted by the Texas GQP of impeachment charges in the Texas QAnon legislature. So now he's literally out there on jitter saying that he's going to get retribution on people in the Biden administration and others who supported the impeachment process,
Right.
which was again, initiated by Republicans.
Yeah.
But once it came time to actually, following through, they pushed out like they always do, because it's not. It is not the doctrine that they're assigned to support.
Right. It's worth noting that Texas does not officially acknowledge that Joe Biden is president. So that's something that we shouldn't memory hole. And the other thing is, with this, with what they were just describing about how Paxton, who has a history of corruption, was not I know, was not impeached. He now gets to go on Fox News and warn the Biden administration to buckle up. So this is what happens when you have somebody as uniquely criminal as Donald Trump, a great term I learned from Ruth. They need to then be surrounded by a sea of criminal and corrupt people in positions that really endanger us tremendously. And so Fox having this guy run on and do his victory lap and poison people's brains about Biden and what he called a sham impeachment is very, very dangerous propaganda.
And we're going to stick with the theme of state-level fuckery. So there's Ohio, there's Texas, and now for our final story this week, we're going to do a story called Cheat Home Alabama. Why? Because Alabama, as everyone should hopefully know, directly defied a federal court ruling saying that they must draw a second majority black district in their state. However, it has come out that Leonard Leo, through some attorneys, is financing the fighting of that ruling. And they're doing it in such a way that they actually have intel from Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh that he is interested in rehearing Alabama's case as a challenge to the Voting Rights Act, Section 2. So basically what Alabama is attempting to do, they're going to go back to court, funded by this billionaire, dark money, Leonard Leo, Opus Dei crap, and they're going to try to strike down the Voting Rights Act.
So this is important for a couple of reasons. It's very important. One is that one of the things we learned from David Pepper is when there is a win, when something good happens, celebrate for an hour and then get back to work, because you know damn well that this is the kind of stuff that will be, anything to continue the erosion from any particular angle without worrying about, the rightness or wrongness of it is to be expected, and we shouldn't be shocked about any of this. But also, it's very important to note that Leonard Leo is under investigation in Washington, D.C. His nonprofits are being investigated. And that's important because we know him as the Supreme Court whisperer who put these radicalized hacks on our court to do just the kind of stuff that Kavanaugh is now doing. Very, very important to know that when the scrutiny comes down and when things don't go their way, they just double down and get more dangerous. So that's really what I wanted to point out about Leonard Leo.
Leonard Leo is one of the most damaging figures in U.S. history. Leonard Leo has put hundreds of justices and judges into the judiciary, all of whom have a certain number of, requirements, which include being, anti-abortion, which include being willing to do things like, destroy the Civil Rights Act, being willing to roll back, things like interracial marriage, and the institutionalized prejudice against LGBTQ people. They are going to repeal all of that. Yeah. That is guaranteed. It's just a matter of how long it will take, and how they get these courses up to the Supreme Court. But they will hear every single case that has added up to any progressive movement over the last 150 years, because their job is to take us back to 1850. That's
right. That's 100% correct. It's very important to note that Leonard Leo was also involved in Merrick Garland blocking the blocking of Merrick Garland from the Supreme Court. His Judicial Crises Network spent $7 million ensuring that Garland was not appointed during the last months of the Obama presidency. When we look at how the Supreme Court is tilted toward these radicalized extremists on the right, we can thank Leonard Leo not only for the Trump appointees, but for what didn't happen back in, back a decade ago, I guess it already is.
Well, that's why you got the three.
Yeah.
Right. One was stolen before he got into power.
Yes.
And the other was stolen right before, which was completely contrary to the way they stole the first one, because they shoved it through 3 weeks before the election at a super spreader.
Right.
This is the fundamental thing that liberals and Democrats cannot fucking fathom, is that there's no morality, there's nothing to negotiate with. There are no norms that apply. There's no institutional value that you're preserving by allowing these motherfuckers to continue to do what they're doing.
That's right. Thank you, Jim. Yes, Hi-Fi.
I just need to point out, we talked about the blocking of Merrick Garland. Tommy Tuberville currently is blocking military promotions. And, when they blocked Merrick Garland, they blocked Merrick Garland so they could get their own people on the court, right? I'm afraid that Tommy Tuberville is blocking military promotions because they want to get their own people into those military positions that are so important.
No way. You mean like the head of the Joint Chiefs, which is coming up soon and which will not be filled because of Tuberville?
Yeah.
So we know what these guys are.
Yes. There's kind of a theme here I wanted to point out to people. The first thing we talked about was adware cybersecurity, and that's corrupt business practices. Then we talked about corrupt government and astroturfing, and when you talk about corrupt businesses, corrupt government officials, and of course, there's always organized crime. I can't help but remind our audience of the speech that Robert Mueller gave on the evolving organized crime threat, in which he referenced the iron triangle of these three things. And I strongly suggest everyone to go out there and read the damn speech, please. And once you read Robert Mueller's speeches, you'll understand why, we're caught in a hellscape.
Jim Stewartsen's hellscape. Oh, fuck.
Hello. there's a lot that has gone on in the last few months. But one thing I wanted to talk about is sort of a big picture thing. We've talked about business infiltration and government infiltration and transnational crime. But there's another very large element to this, which is religion. But I use religion in quotes, not because I'm slamming religion as a blanket. What I'm doing is slamming a certain part of religion that has come up across the world. And the thing that's kind of brought this up to me is the recent obvious collaboration between people that you would think should not agree about anything, right? You got Elon Musk, who's an atheist, and wants apartheid back, a neo-Nazi, frankly. You got Putin, who is a Christian Russian Orthodox, right? And you've got MBS, who is a Wahhabi. So if you're not familiar with Wahhabism, let me just sort of explain that for a second. It's a part of Islam that a couple hundred years ago followed a cult of personality of someone who wanted to bring Islam back to traditionalist values, right? To a pure version of Islam that dispensed with all of the previous, progressive kind of changes to it, and it infiltrated Saudi Arabia, and over the course of time took over Saudi Arabia, and that was a long time ago. It has been one of the most repressive regimes on planet Earth. It has had its slight variations, but it has always been a incredibly misogynistic, authoritarian, fascist government, right? So Islam is really not. Islam, Judaism, and Christianity come from the same book. Remember that. It's all the same thing. It literally comes from the same book. All of those religions, it just sort of kind of changed into different variations, which is normal human behavior. But in each of those segments, right, in each of the main currents, you've had this extremist, regressive movement pop up. The problem that we're having right now is that they're all conspiring together. They all know who each other are, and they all are willing to completely put aside any theoretical, disagreements over religion, over God, over their beliefs, over anything, right? In order to conspire. Why is that? Why is it, again, a Wahhabi, a neo-Nazi, a Russian Orthodox are conspiring with evangelical Christians in America, specifically Dominionists, to do all of these extremely disturbing things? Why is that? The reason is because it's the same thing. It's just male-dominated, fascist dictatorship bundled up in different variations. So you can go to 4chan and see one of those variations, which is basically Elon Musk's version, right? And you go to Mike Flynn and see this sort of quasi-occult semi-Catholic version. You can go to all these dominionist preachers who are literally telling their flocks that Christianity needs to take over all aspects of society. And then you can look at Putin and what he's been doing with the Russian Orthodox Church and pulling people out of Ukraine and indoctrinating children into his own fascist fake version of ideology. None of this is real, right? None of these flavors that they proselytize to their individual cults are real. And the way you know that is because they openly work together. They don't care. Vladimir Putin, literally a couple of days ago, praised Elon Musk for his incredible contributions to the world and said he looks forward to working more together. Elon Musk and MBS, the theocratic ruler of Saudi Arabia, who, by the way, murdered Khashoggi with Israeli software, because Netanyahu is on the same team, incredibly. Because these are psychopaths. And we've talked about this before, how psychopathy is now Darwinian in terms of enabling a rise to power. And that's because the rest of us, all of us sitting here looking agape at this, have been frankly complicit and allowed it to happen. We need to have our own revolution. And I don't use that word lightly because it brings up all kinds of, pictures of violence and all kinds of stuff. The revolution I'm talking about is a revolution of empathy. It is a revolution of sanity. And the only way that we are going to come back from where we are is through conflict, unfortunately. And I don't mean necessarily physical conflict at all. It's standing up to these people. We have been the victims of a psychological war for a long time, decades really, but since Donald Trump came along and Mike Flynn came along to help him, we have been in the victims of a hot psychological war. Our press and our government has failed. 100% failed to explain what has happened, why there is so much chaos, not just in America, but around the world, and who is responsible for it. We've got two alternate realities out in the world, and they're both just as false. One reality is that the United States and basically the world is a woke shithole full of degenerates, and what we really need is fucking Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin to team up and fix everything, right? That's an alternate reality that has been successfully created in at least a third of the United States. There's also a whole bunch of people who only get their news and their information from mainstream media and from what they hear from official government sources. And it used to be that was a fine decision. It used to be that you're just a normal person who gets their news from the normal places, right? Used to be the smart thing. Unfortunately, it's not anymore. Unfortunately, the government is willing to tell us what's going on because it reveals all kinds of very scary shit inside the government that they want to put aside so that they could win politics, right? And it's the same with the press, who have set up an entire system for decades now of watching a ping pong match between the left and the right. Ping pong, ping pong. You say something bad, and then you say something bad, and her emails. He's a Russian asset. Her emails. He's a fucking rapist. Her emails, right? And that was not a function of the right, right? Because people are going to make shit up all the time. They're going to lie in politics. That will never change. What happened in 2016, I'm seeing it happen all over again, is to pretend that somehow that these lies are the thing that you have to report in order to be fair and balanced. We're not in a fair and balanced world. We are not. There are not two sides anymore. We do not have a two-party political system. We have a population under assault by one of the parties in our two-party political system. A party which is collaborating with a Wahhabi from Saudi Arabia, a Russian Orthodox from Russia, and every other dictator, despot, criminal, and mafia member on planet Earth. And our media and our government are creating a reality in which none of this exists. It's fucking politics, right? Meet the press. It's a brand new Meet the Press. We're gonna have a new go at it after 9 years of fucking Chuck Todd. What are we gonna do? We're gonna do a fucking interview with Donald Trump where we don't challenge him on a thing. Let him spew his bullshit into the mainstream of America. We need conflict. We need people to say to Meet the Press and see everyone involved in that fucking decision, you are the problem. You are both siding us to the death of the American experiment. You need to change. We have to start being comfortable with these kinds of conflicts, because the conflict that they're looking for is a conflict that's going to use the 450 million guns that they have implanted in the United States over the last 50 years. That is the conflict they want.
That's right.
So we have a choice. We've got two realities. Both of them are false. The one that says that we're woke hellhole, I think everybody who has not been pulled into this understands that is false. What I think a lot of us don't understand yet is that the other alternate reality in which this is politics, in which there is some sort of give and take in a system where there's a back and forth between two sides of an argument. That is not the reality that we're in. And the government and the press and all of us have to start recognizing that this is a war. It is not politics. We are at war, and all we're doing is delaying the inevitable conflict. So we can have a conflict of words where a bunch of us get really fucking pissed off that our authorities, our institutions are not protecting us. We can have that conflict, or we can have a different one. So I will land this plane by just saying, look, I love this country. I want my children to bring up their children in this nation. But we've got a whole lot of people who have allowed themselves and their institutions to be subsumed, to be complicit, to be functions of our own destruction. And I refuse to be silent during that process. And I hope everybody listening here will join me.
Because this is a show where we're not afraid to talk about the head of the Hydra, Vladimir Putin, I just want to button up some of what Jim was saying by letting our viewers know that the head of the Orthodox Church is just a KGB spy in a dress. And so much of what we are fighting. Yes, so much of what that's right.
Just his.
He's one of the most virulent propagandists for the Kremlin, and he's just an old KGB spy who now wears a costume to do Putin's dirty work, and he's one of his old St. Petersburg bros. And I just want people to know that what Jim has been trying to tell you is that you have to realize that we are, and when you talk about an alternate reality, we're being gamed, whether it's through religion and, you know, spies in dresses, or how we're being gamed and understanding the war that we're actually having. And that is why we wanted to begin our new season with live reporting from Ukraine, because all of this is part of the same battle for a world that is organized by authoritarian rule, or a world that is still enjoying the post-World War II freedoms that come with democratic principles and values. And so with that, we're going to bring in our friend Sian Norris, my writing partner and good friend, who's also an incredible investigative reporter, incredible feminist author who did the book Bodies Under Siege. She's reporting live from Ukraine and is bringing us news from Kharkiv a year after a very pivotal battle there. And let's just let Sian tell us why we need to be listening to the people and not the alternate realities being created or denied from our governments and our media.
Sian Norris, we are so happy to see you. We're so happy to see that you are safe and sound in the Radicalized Truth Survives logo. Seriously, though, we just want our viewers to know that you actually endured shelling for the first time last night. Why don't we start there, and then you let us know exactly what the update is.
Yes, so I'm currently in Kyiv. I arrived here from Kharkiv this morning, having spent just under a week in Kharkiv in the east of Ukraine. So yesterday, Kharkiv, the city itself, was shelled at around 11 o'clock in the morning. Reuters are reporting that Russia had shelled it was just outside the city centre in the kind of industrial area. And Russia has said that it hit an armoured vehicle repair plant in Ukraine's Kharkiv. Straight after the shelling happened, I had a conversation with the chief of police in the city, who described it as a war crime. You know, this was 5 explosions just outside the city centre. People were injured. it was, it was incredibly scary. I've been to Ukraine before, but when I was here last time, there wasn't any shelling where I was. So this was my first experience of shelling. We were in a cafe. As soon as there was this huge bang, my fixer was like a meerkat. She just went like this, straight up. And we moved into a safer part of the cafe just by the toilets. Heard the explosions, and then the explosions stopped, and we left and drove towards where the shelling was, and you could still, an hour later, see the smoke rising above the city. After that, we carried on with our day. One of the odd things that I've discovered being in a conflict zone is that when things like this happen, everybody just gets back to normal really quickly.
Wow.
Within 20 minutes, everybody's walking around the city, cars are going past, buses are full of people, people are ordering coffees. Then just after midnight, there were another 4 explosions in Kharkiv itself. According to local news sources, Kyiv Independent and Pravda Ukraine, this was hitting civilian infrastructure. So again, this was obviously there's a curfew in Ukraine now. In Kharkiv, that curfew starts at 11 o'clock at night. So I was in a hotel that doesn't have a shelter, so we just went into the bathroom, which is a safety advice, took my duvet with me into the bathroom, huddled up and waited for the shelling to be over. But as I say, according to local news reports, this was on civilian infrastructure. And as I say, when I spoke to the chief of police after the shelling in the morning, he described it as a war crime because, as he put it, this is about terrorizing civilians. It is about making civilians afraid. When you have strikes so close to the city centre in the middle of the day, when everyone's getting on with their day, that's about frightening people and creating terror. There was also a strike near the Russian border, outside of Kharkiv city itself, which is only 30 kilometers from the Russian border. According to various news reports and sources on the ground, that was a strike against a civilian car, and civilians were killed in that strike. So it was a day of a lot of bangs and a lot of injuries and sadly a few deaths. And it just kind of goes to show that this war is continuing. Like, the shelling happens every day in different parts of Ukraine. There are air alerts almost all the time. So we have to kind of keep our attention on what is happening here in Eastern Europe.
So let's tell I'm glad you're safe, and I'm sorry to hear this. We've been documenting war crimes for the last year and a half, and it seems like we know that they're happening, and yet, there doesn't seem to be enough will to actually do anything, about it that actually is going to have impacts, other than we continue to expose and report. Our friend Zarina did a documentary with John Sweeney, one of your, colleagues, the Eastern Front, which documented war crime after war crime, and here we are. Tell our viewers who are global what Kharkiv is like, and what basically the updates are from a year ago, when there was a big, celebration of liberation, to what people are experiencing now.
So it's important to understand that Kharkiv, the city itself, was never occupied. There was a strong battle at the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in end of February, early March 2022. But Kharkiv city itself was never occupied, but it was severely shelled. There is not a street that you walk down in Kharkiv that does not have evidence of shelling. Everywhere you look, there are buildings that are collapsed. There are boarded up windows. The places where people have stayed, you see that there is plywood in the windows. Where they have left and not returned, the windows are still empty. I went to Saltivka, which is just out, sort of on the edge of the city. It's one of the worst situations of shelling that I've ever seen. We visited a building where the whole front of the building was completely sheared off, and I met people who were having their windows replaced. There were these lots and lots of apartment blocks in this area that had been shelled. It's a ghost town, that part of the city. There are a few people living in these buildings, and their windows are being replaced, and we're seeing renovations happen, but it's incredibly slow. I think when you then go outside of Kharkiv itself into the areas that were occupied, I went to Izum last week, where, again, when I thought the shelling was bad in Kharkiv, or the shelling damage was bad in Kharkiv, nothing prepares you for Izum. The absolute destruction of that city is unbearable to witness. according to the deputy mayor, 80% of apartment buildings have damage. 80% of civic buildings, that includes schools, that includes hospitals, community centres, government buildings, and 30% of private dwellings, which is, like houses, like individual houses, have damage. You talk to people in the villages outside of Kharkiv who, saw their homes shelled during extreme fighting last year, and those houses have not been repaired. I spoke to a woman yesterday. She was 76 years old. She was sweeping the leaves outside the front of her house. Her house was completely shelled. She'd lived there her whole life. She doesn't have enough money to rebuild her house. She just goes to visit it every day to sweep the leaves outside to keep it nice, even though there is really nothing left except the walls. And so I think when you walk around, you really do witness the destruction wreaked by Russian forces on this country and on the civilian population. The words that woman said to me will live with me forever. She said, the Russians have liberated us from everything. And I turned to my translator and I was like, I don't understand. And she was like, they've liberated us from our homes, from our cars, from everything we own. We have nothing left. This idea, this propaganda, this disinformation that I've even seen on Twitter, like yesterday while the shelling was happening, of people saying, oh, Russia is liberating people in the east of Ukraine. As this woman says, they've liberated us from everything we own, everything we had, our lives. In a Zoom, I spoke to people that had survived war crimes, people that had survived torture. There's not just the physical scars of the harms done to the towns, of the harms done to the buildings, the emotional scars done to people who have been tortured, who have been beaten, who have lost their loved ones, who were separated from loved ones for months at a time. You can rebuild the houses. It's going to be a massive task. I don't even know how you start to rebuild when the war is continuing. It's not like there's a space where you can go, okay, now we can bring in the bricks, the mortar, the cement. The war is still going on, but how you rebuild the psychological welfare and well-being and safety of this country is going to be as big, if not a bigger task than the actual infrastructure rebuilding when that time comes.
Yeah, it's incredible to me the depth of the disinformation in America about Ukraine. I mean, it's not as surprising that the very right wing of the party, which has been largely Republican Party, which has been captured by Putin, is spreading this sort of disinformation. What's surprising to most people, I think, is how much of it is coming from the left. How sort of pervasive the horseshoe of disinformation about what's actually happening in Ukraine is. I just wanted to, since you were there, what do the Ukrainians think about the if they do, about what's happening in America and the sort of psychological war we're having inside of our own borders, about what's real and what isn't over there?
So I didn't speak to anyone specifically about disinformation in the US. I was lucky to speak to some artists working in Kharkiv, a street artist and a photographer, and we talked a little bit about the importance of documenting this war, of constantly being vigilant, taking photos, speaking to people, documenting war crimes. Again, this was coming also from people in sort of official circles, in order to combat this disinformation. If you keep recording, if you keep taking those pictures, if you keep showing the truth, then there is no way that disinformation can take hold. I mean, we know it's taken hold, so maybe that's a naive thing to say, but I think what I'm trying to express is that the evidence is there. We see it with our own eyes. You talk to people, you talk to someone who is describing their experiences of torture. You meet an old lady who's crying at you on the street about the suffering that she has endured. If what I find so frustrating, particularly on the sort of red-brown alliance of the left-wing disinformation, is like, why don't you speak to any Ukrainian people? You know, like, you just need to talk to them. They will tell you what is going on here. I think there is such a huge effort in Ukraine from human rights organizations, from artists, from civilians, from people who have become volunteers, who are absolutely dedicated to recording, whatever that looks like in their own field, whether, like I say, that's a photographer who is taking pictures of the harm, the suffering, whether it's journalists, you know, the amazing work of Ukrainian journalists, which I reported on last time I was here, whether it's the police officers who have had their entire jobs change. You know, I spoke to this chief of police yesterday who was like, we used to catch, you know, our job used to be about, you know, criminal justice of Ukrainian people, like shoplifters, you know, violent criminals, whatever, what we recognize as police being. Now their job is documenting war crimes. And so I think when it comes to disinformation, the absolute refusal by too many parties on all sides of the political spectrum to listen to Ukrainian voices, to actually look at the evidence in front of them that is coming out from Ukraine, is absolutely shameful. I mean, I've been very lucky that I've been able to come here and do this work and talk to people face to face, but you don't have to do that. You can just look on, you know, Instagram. You can, you know, you can look at, watch events, like take part in solidarity actions. And so, yeah, I think, as I say, I wasn't talking to people directly about the US situation and disinformation in the US, but disinformation and the need to tackle that was high on people's agenda.
Thank you for that. Hi-Fi, you jump in.
So one of the things here in America that the far right is very insistent on is, we're here to save the children, right? And they use that as a propaganda point. However, we know from other reporting that in Ukraine, Putin and Russia are murdering children, they're stealing children, they're raping and torturing children. Have you spoken to anyone about that?
So I think it's one of the most painful and most shocking aspects of, I mean, of any conflict. I don't think it's a unique situation. But what we see in Ukraine, and what numerous people have told me when I've asked about the impact, psychological impact, the impact of trauma, is the torture of children. That the hardest people to reach, the hardest people to get to reach out for psychological care are children who have either been tortured or have been witness to torture. And the first time someone said this to me in Kharkiv was, you know, I was taken aback, like, how can you torture children? Like, what is this? Like, how can it even be an issue that children need psychological support for having endured torture? It's absolutely horrifying. Last time I was here in July, I spoke to journalists who had actually rescued two young, well, one was 18 and one was 17 or 16, who had been taken by the Russians out of their home and taken to a sort of school where they were sort of being indoctrinated. And this, initially, the story that they were working on was to get evidence of the treatment and conditions that children were being held in by the Russian Federation in these abduction cases. But actually, they realized the more they were doing the story, the more they had to protect their sources. They supported these two young women to escape. I'd really recommend the film, and I'll send the link to you so that you can share it with your viewers. I think we know that when you shell civilian infrastructure, the risk is that children will be killed. But I also think we need to remember that when you shell schools, you know, it's not just the actual murder of children, it's also the kind of wider destruction of children's lives when you're shelling schools, when you're shelling kindergartens. I spoke to a woman who was a mother of two toddlers where the kindergarten was shelled, and she's like, you know, now I've had to quit work to look after my two children because I can't take them to the kindergarten. Like, my whole life has has changed as a result, but also those children aren't getting the kind of socialization, the education that they would be getting if they were in that kind of kindergarten space. The trauma of seeing your school destroyed, that sense that this is a place where you go every day, that is a sort of second home. The Ukrainian government has obviously been incredible at providing online learning, both for children within Ukraine itself and also for children who have left the country and become refugees. But that's not the same as going into school every day. We all know this from the pandemic, when children were taken out of school, the issues that creates. And so we have this whole spectrum of difficulties and challenges and terror against children, which needs to be really strongly examined. And again, we need to listen to the experiences of families.
Yes. So one of the things that I have been thinking a lot about is the cruelty is the point. We're dealing with a mafia state, a terrorist state. We're dealing with a leader who appears to get off on this type of cruelty because it's been an ongoing thing for decades. And I'm very worried in the US, which has the ability to supply Ukraine with everything it needs to beat Russia, that there is a numbness that has set in. And there's also the combination of what Jim was talking about, which is also the constant poison of disinformation. And it's very important for me that in the time that we have here with you left, that we wake people up out of that stupor and get them to understand what the stakes are with this war. And we've talked about this since February 24th of 2022. And again, wars aren't numbers. Wars aren't how many people died in a day. That is stuff that I think that people become numb to. This is a fight for the future of democratic principles in the entire world. And what are the best words you can offer that we can share with our viewers to get people out of this numbness and this sort of kind of apathetic mind state about the stakes of this war?
So I just want to pick up as well on the thing that you said about the cruelty is the point. I don't want to go into too much detail about some of the testimonies I heard because they are incredibly distressing. But one person I spoke to in a Zoom described the torture of a friend of his. So this was a secondhand piece of information. I didn't speak directly to this victim, but he described how she was denied food when she was being held by the Russians, and when they brought her food, they put it in a toilet bowl. And so it was like, you want food, then you have to eat it out of this toilet bowl. And she was like, I don't want to eat food out of a toilet bowl. But then the other option was she didn't eat and then she would starve. And it was like, what do I do? Do I eat from the toilet bowl or do I starve? The person that I spoke to, who was a torture, like the direct conversation I had with a torture survivor, described how on the third day of being denied food and water, they were like, if you want water, you just need to ask for water. And he was like, can I have some water? And they just poured it on the floor. So he couldn't, they offered him water, but then they poured it on the floor. That is like the minor aspects of the torture when you consider the other experiences that person described to me. But it is a real sign of that cruelty that, this isn't, it's not, the torture goes beyond the physical when you're also doing things like that. I think when I was in a Zoom, I visited the mass graves that are just on the edge of the city. There's a mass grave of 449 people, many or some of whom I'm not sure of the exact figure, died as a result of torture and of extrajudicial killings. Some of them died as a result of shelling. Some of them died as a result of the fact that there was no medicine, that there was no electricity, no heating for the period of the occupation. You can't visit a mass grave and not really realize what the stakes are of this conflict. That there's no way that you can see that and be numb. You can't continue to think that this is, to frame that very famous Chamberlain quote about Czechoslovakia, the troubles of a small country far away between people of whom we know nothing. This is in Europe, and almost every person I spoke to said, if we do not respond to this, if Ukraine does not win, then it will be the rest of Europe that is on fire. And so I would really urge anyone that has fatigue, that has supporter apathy, that has that like, oh, there's just so many terrible things happening in the world. There are terrible things happening in the US, which we obviously know. There are terrible things happening in Libya and in Morocco. We know that the world is a very unstable and dangerous place. But the one thing that you can do for Ukraine is to listen to people who are living in Ukraine. Listen to what they are telling you about the experiences that they are having. Listen to what it means to live through shelling, to lose your home, to lose your loved ones. The last thing I did in Kharkiv before I left this morning was visit the military cemetery, and you stand there and you look at the extent of graves, each one marked by a flag. It was really breezy. All the flags were moving in the breeze, and you look at the ages of these people who were born this century. You know, I'm an 1980s baby, and I was, you know, look at these young men and women who have died as a result of the full-scale invasion. And the thing that we can do to honor them and to respect what has happened here is to listen to those who are asking to be heard, and that is the Ukrainian people.
Last question that I have for you, Sian, is what do Western leaders need to do today?
Everyone I spoke to has said what we need is more weapons and air defenses. So we need to continue to support Ukraine with weapons. We need to support them with air defenses. But also, when I spoke to civilians, it's the humanitarian aid as well is really important. This woman I spoke to that I mentioned, this 74-year-old, at first she didn't want to speak to me. She was like, I don't want to talk to the media because who is helping me? Who is helping me? And then she sort of mellowed a bit and let us talk to her somewhat. But that sense of feeling abandoned, that they're not getting the help that they need. But the crucial thing is to be able to fight back and to win this war, because as I say, like particularly people who worked either in the police or in local government were like, if we do not win in Ukraine, then all of Europe will be on fire.
That's absolutely the summary. That's it. And the West is already on fire. We've been groomed to expect the inevitable by the disinformation war that we are subject to every single day. Sian Norris, I'm so grateful to you for risking your life to report these stories from Ukraine. It's really, really important. And I'm very, very grateful that you were here with us today. Guys, do you have any last minute thoughts?
I just want to echo what you said, Heidi. Thank you, Sian, for being here. It's one of the most important interviews we've done. We need to get people out of the stupor that they're currently in, and thank you for helping us to do that.